Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Remember me? Okay, I won't talk about some of the trigger warnings here. I thought IRA 11 was okay to discuss. Maybe I spoke of him in the wrong context, or maybe when I moved over to JD Salinger, maybe that really triggered the algorithm here. Most of you know, and you saw from the pic there that Salinger's work, especially Catcher in the Rye, is the best example of what I call the psycho trigger word magic. And most of you know, and this has become more and more apparent now that J.D. Salinger's background in the intelligence world is really what helped bring him to literary prominence. It was not necessarily, and he was a decent writer. I'm not saying he's not, but it's not necessarily the beauty of his prose that catapulted him to become a literary superstar to the point where people would come to his hermitage, if you want to call it that, and bug him and ask for advice, and he was always getting letters from people to help them along with their literature. He became sort of like a guru to a whole generation. And supposedly, people of the baby boom generation, or a little bit earlier than that, the post-war generation, read Catchers and the in the Rye as sort of a rite of passage. Just like today, kids will have to read Harry Potter or or some other book that's out there, Hunger Games. It's just like everybody else, and they line up 12 o'clock and wait for the latest installment of J.K. Rowling. Well, not on that level, but Catch in the Rye seemed to be a rite of passage. Not for me, because it was such a popular novel. I studiously stayed away from it, just like I avoided reading Hermann Hesse, which was also popular at the time, until later. And I got it, I understood it, and I appreciate it. But now we're finding out, and this is the first full length, at least that I know, biography of Salinger, J.D. Salinger. He was known as Jerry by Ian Hamilton. Is called In Search of J.D. Salinger. And Salinger, it's called In Search of because he could not find Salinger. Salinger and his legal help were successful in preventing publication of the biography that was written by Ian Hamilton. So Ian Hamilton had to go around that by making the book about looking for J.D. Salinger instead of J.D. Salinger directly. And now I know the reason why there were so many roadblocks. By the way, I read this in October 1989. This is why, I used to date my books just to see where I was at. Now I know why that there were all these roadblocks and why there were enormous fees incurred by Salinger through law firms in order to block any investigation into his past, biographical or otherwise. And again, as I alluded to earlier, it's because of his relationship to the intelligence agencies. And now that has come out, it's pretty clear that he was read into some sort of a national security type of program to control post-war arts and letters. We already know about the sciences, right? Seeing the outcome of the oppressive, monopolistic, hyper-monopolistic control of foundations and universities and investment organs and their front men, right? In the area of the hard sciences, but the same is true for the world of letters. Yes, letters has in word magic. These are men of letters. These are men of word. They understand that in order for the hard sciences to take control, you have to have the soft side, which is the metaphysical, the occultic, and the esoteric combined. And then you'll have an amalgam of power that you can wield on an unwitting humanity, except for the fact that there are some monkeys that escape the cage, such as you and me, who can break it down and put it together and understand what J.D. Salinger and Patricia Highsmith and, of course, Shirley Jackson have talked about, and Edgar Allan Poe and Melville. What they were really telling us, they were throwing these messages in the bottle for us, and all that isn't even taking into consideration the filmmakers, right? We're just talking about the written word right now. So there's hope because we're digging here. We're digging on our own. We don't need no stinking badges in order to find out the truth. Well, let me just add another piece of biographical information that helps to confirm that, or tends to confirm that Salinger was an asset. He was recruited by a professor of writing at Columbia University. His name was Whit Burnett, not Whitney, not Witless, but Whit Burnett, right? They like to give him a kind of a homey type of, homespun name, nickname, like Bob or Ted, but it's not Whitney. Maybe he's related to the Whitneys, and he wanted to, I don't know, look into his background. Whit Burnett, Whit, and he and his wife were the editors, the founders, and the editors of a very popular magazine called Story. Appropriately enough, Story, right? Word magic, Story, printed word, like Fitzgerald. Now it wasn't like Harper's Bazaar or any of the, like the New Yorker. It didn't have that prestige and it didn't have that payment schedule on that level. But it was still considered a legit outlet for established writers. You got your short story published in that particular publication, and you were set. You were on your way. You might even get a contract from Hollywood and write a couple of B movies and maybe work your way up. A lot of those 30s and up into the early 40s writers gravitated to Hollywood. Their skills were in demand. You know the story, as I alluded to earlier, of F. Scott Fitzgerald Hemingway, even William Faulkner, another Gothic writer, by the way, Southern Gothic, that I need to go back and reread his material as well. They wound up in Hollywood. So the Story magazine, in other words, was an avenue for the new medium, right? Just like most writers now are going to either the video game world or Netflix. Back then it was Hollywood, the movies. So that's Whit Burnett at Columbia University. And those of you who do this type of research and work and you watch the programs, that Columbia University looms large in the recruitment and the advancement of people who work for what we call today now as the deep state. People like, well, I won't mention his name, but he was once president of the United States, and he still lives in Colorado with his husband. And he went to Columbia. No one ever saw him there, but supposedly on his Vita, his resume, he went to his undergraduate work there, and then was recruited to go to Harvard, and then eventually he became president of the United States. And he was even appointed the editor of the Harvard Law Review, despite the fact that he never wrote a single article himself, not a single piece of legal research. So when you consider that and all this prestige lineage and their output and their non-performance, you have to figure, man, something's up here. And Salinger retired from public life at a fairly early age. They brought him to a certain level, and either his cover was, I don't know why they had to retire. He did get to die of old age. He wasn't terminated with extreme prejudice, as it's been said, or he did not meet the fate of some of better known or well-known victims of the so-called Health Alteration Committee. But his career span was short-lived here. Whit Burnett. Let's see here. Yeah, Salinger. I'll put this on my pantry. You might find it interesting. This is J.D. Salinger's himself in his own writing. It's well, not in his own writing, but it's a story about Salinger giving a tribute to Whit Burnett, because it was Whit Burnett that plucked Jerry Salinger out of this classroom of aspiring wannabe people of letters, men and women both, and said, Jerry, you got some talent here. There's some problems with your style. We'll just tweak in here and submit it. And, he had an in, Whit Burnett. And well, it took a while, but Salinger was soon enough installed as one of the shining lights in post-war American literature. That's Whit Burnett. So these people are manufactured. And again, I don't mean to say they don't have talent, but they need sponsorship. They need a groomer in order to advance to the next level. And if you're a writer or a researcher, I don't want you to be dissuaded from doing it. You can somehow slip the censors. My career is a good example of that. You have to have something to say, and you have to have a desperate need in order to get it out, and your material will get out, whether it's the written word, spoken word, comedy, for example, or music, film, whatever it might be, or just nonfiction, whatever it is, you'll get it out there. So that's all I wanted to say about Salinger at this point. Let me just give you a little bit of an idea of how I got onto this topic. I went back in my notes and I came up as early as March 26, 2016, with this concept of the psychotext. I have a different term for it, but I'm not using it right now. I'm kind of keeping that in reserve for myself. See, you have to kind of hold back your own word magic. Do you understand? The great poet and musician Muddy Waters, right? You know him as a blues man, right? Who came up with an incredible classic blues tunes that have been covered from, I mean, the Rolling Stones named themselves after one of his songs, The Rolling Stone. But whenever Muddy Waters was a little bit too, let's say, generous with images or words or rhyme schemes, he would always put his fingers up to his lips, telling himself, keep quiet. There's could be a biter out there in the audience. And believe me, I have lots of biters. I'm not you. In the academic world, I have people who are simultaneously trying to hammer and hold me down, but by trying to bite my rhymes, right? So that's why I'm holding off the word here, because these terms can make or break careers. Really, they can make careers. So I'm going to call it just a psychotext. Maybe I'll use that. I kind of like that. It's growing on me, but that's not the original note that I left to myself back in March of 2016. And what I meant by that, it's a novel, it's a story, it's poetry, it's a libretto that's encoded with insider significance. I'm reading right from my notes here. Insider significance, that's the esoteric. That's the secret society connection. And I give the example of Catcher in the Rye. This is back, I've known this for years. Helter Skelter, the song, right, by the Beatles. And you know who adopted that one, right? Charles Manson. And you know who's behind Charles Manson. Yes, the intelligence agencies. Or even before that, before the internet, right? Because the internet's being blamed for spawning all these quote unquote conspiracy. No. These so-called conspiracy theories have been around since 2 or 3 people got together and said, hey, let's gang up on that guy. And an example of that is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who came up with die Glaubeflaute, otherwise known as the magic flute. Total Masonic text. You know that. I don't even have to talk about it because the majority of you who are in the live stream are up to speed when it comes to these psychotexts. So I don't need to go there. I am slightly ahead of the curve by looking at the work of Stieg Larsson, right? The girl who kicked over the hornet's nest, and that whole series is being a psychotext that has triggered the Fourth Nazi International, especially the one that's been hiding out in Sweden since the end of the war and have killed at least 2 prime ministers, Dag Hammarskjöld and Olof Palme, and is the site where the country where this guy Carl Bildt, who was a former prime minister of Sweden, who's perfectly aligned with the deep state, or they finally got the prime minister they wanted, the one that was in their pocket, Carl Bildt, who our friend George Webb talks about quite often. And another person, just in passing, and maybe I'll devote an entire talk to, because a lot of you might be fans of him. Probably the most important creator of psychotext now, and he died recently. But he has a body of work that I think we should go back and reevaluate. But the most important one, at least in my estimation, would be Professor Umberto Eco, the guy that did, In the Name of the Rose. That's the novel that catapulted him into fame. And then he did Foucault, not Michel, but he did a novel called Foucault's Pendulum, and Prague Cemetery, I think, is his last book before he died, and on and on. He's written a lot of literary essays, very interested in popular culture as well. So the crypto text authors are still very much with us, and perhaps you can introduce me to some who are doing work now. Yes, I know about J.K. Rowling and the Hunger Games people, but there seems to be a whole crop of people, and they're mostly female, who are writing books that feature magi or maguses or witches, female witches, and they're into the occult. So there's kind of a Gothic revival going on right now in 2021. I don't know if this is sort of the capstone that's being placed on this whole body of the Gothic tradition that was pioneered by people like Edgar Allan Poe, or whether it's a departure from, or it's a way of trying to help us reconcile ourselves to our dark past, where this ooze, this underground stream that one of the characters in The Haunting of Hill House talks about, the underground streams and the currents that keep oozing up and breeding mosquitoes and pestilence and swamp gas and all sorts of abominations, so that visit upon the people of America, whether they're in the form of cryptids or disease or ghosts or other hauntings, right? Now, just to give you a little bit of historical background, we can take it all the way back to the Bible. You know that Adam, right? The original Adam, not Adam Smith, the economist and also the British agent, but Adam, right? He went through the Garden of Eden, naming all the creatures of God's universe, and in uttering the word, and then later on it came out. I'll let the archaeologists debate this one when writing ever came about. But he was creating the universe, the man-made universe, through the naming process. But let me get more specific, okay? Less theological, more specific. We can point to, and this is some notes that I took recently about the Irish literary revival, and just to show you how pervasive the psychotext is in all around the world. But I'm just talking about the English language tradition here. In this case, it's the Irish dimension of that. Not the Gaelic, the Irish English Irish. And this comes from an academic article. It's a journal. It's a James Joyce Quarterly. Talk about word magic. James Joyce, wow. This title of the article is Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy in Finnegan's Wake. Yes, James Joyce was influenced by Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophist. He was not, however, a Theosophist. In fact, and this is from his letters, and biographers have dug this out, he was not contemptuous, he was mocking of Theosophists. He did not subscribe to Theosophy. People like William Butler Yeats did. He was a Theosophist, and it influenced his poetry to a very high degree. And by the way, you never learn this when you're looking at his work in high school, or if you were an English major in college. And if these persons were taught from this perspective that I'm introducing, the crypto criticism through the psychotext approach, you'd have classrooms that were just bulging with students who want to learn more and more and more. And as I told you before, that's already starting to happen. There is a renewal within the humanities that are reevaluating this whole heritage from the lens that I have helped pioneer. I don't have to be someone with an English PhD or comparative literature. I'm just an intelligent reader who understands and has done a great deal of research and writing into these different esoteric traditions. And if you do that, you will find specific manifestations of those traditions, such as the case of William Butler Yeats, the Theosophy, Bram Stoker. We've talked about another Irish author who was very much influenced by this. But I mentioned Joyce in this specific context because it's not a one-way street. If you view Theosophy as, say, an abomination, right? An assault on a deeper and more valuable and gracious tradition that's founded upon the Abrahamic religions, right? Instead of trying to supplant it and do away with it and subordinate it, then you will see that Joyce's critique is being devastating towards Theosophy. And we could do the same. We do not, just because Salinger and all these other people have subscribed to it and were bought off through this whole intelligence apparatus. As long as we recognize it, and that's really the key there, recognizing it, identifying the source of the problem, we have a chance to overcome it. If we don't recognize the problem, of course, we're it's not going to happen. Just like if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right answer. And this also, I'm mentioning Joyce here because he is the product of a Jesuit education. He went to Trinity College, and a generation later, about 20 years later, you have Samuel Beckett was a graduate in, I guess, language. I think they both came out with languages degrees, modern languages. And he was a product of a Jesuit education. Were they like part of this international Vatican assassin network, and the Jesuits blamed for everyone? No, not at all. That Jesuit education provided them with training and a background in the classic, in esoterica, in understanding what I'm calling the psychotext. Right? They were doing a better job of it than the universities of today, because the universities of today were bought off by another esoteric tradition. It's a tradition that held up God. I mean, science. It held up science as being the replacement for God. At least whatever its flaws. Trinity, College and the Jesuit institutions, at least of old. I don't know about today. Were focused from a God-centered understanding. It was assumed. So anyway, the point is that there's some hope there if we can understand what the problem is here. So that's I think the most immediate precursor to what became part of the American literary tradition. We were an extension of that, and there was something similar going on, not just in Ireland, but throughout the British Isles, and of course throughout the United States. Let me go through some articles here to show you that there are people other than me that's looking at this type of work. Let's see here. This is just material I found today. The Power of Words. I think it's written by an anthropologist, and this is in Eastern Europe, The Power of Words. And the subtitle is Studies on Charms and Charming in Europe. That's the spoken word, but also inscriptions or physical objects, right? This is not something, and I think this is an anthropologist, but I just got it today, so I haven't really looked at it. Anti-witchcraft rituals in Eastern Europe. I have a source, Psychoanalysis, Literature, and Culture, that talks about the psychotext. Another scholarly piece of work. And I'm telling you this is because if we draw on this type of work and put it in the curriculum, it'll push out the race, class, gender mafia there that's been running academia and ruining society in general, because they've become the legislators of behavior and thought in society. And I hold them as being responsible for the current lockdown, the medical lockdown. They don't write about that, do they? Here's another article to show you how we're talking about a cultural universal here on the psycho text here, the word magic. This is called, this article, it's in the History of Religions, Magic in the Monastery. No, 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 not the Italian monastery, not the English monastery. Textual practice and monastic identity in Sri Lanka, right? We're talking about all over the world. Here's something from the pre-Columbian period. Down in Sierra Mazateca. This is an anthropologist from Brown University, Ivy League, right? Paha Fradre. It's called Tales from the Land of Magic Plants, Textual Ideologies and Fetishes of Indigeneity in Mexico's Sierra. And this talks about his engagement with mushrooms down there. So that type of literature is still happening, and they're looking at they're reevaluating literature from the more esoteric perspective that it was kind of peeking through in the 1960s with but it was suppressed. It was swamped by the new god, which is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Here's another article, University of Copenhagen, Ade Hernandez, the Ajamization of Islam in Ethiopia through esoteric textual manifestations in 2 collections of Ethiopian Arabic manuscripts. Okay, that's that's arcane, admittedly. What I'm trying to establish is that there are people who are looking into this. I'm also finding research that I was not aware of, and most undergraduates would not be aware of a concerted and heavy investment in studying ancient Sumerian texts and translating them. That's text too. That is text. That's word. That is part of this tradition. It's connected. It's part of the psychotrigger word magic concept that I'm putting out there, that we need to push forward and help it supplant the race, class, gender mafia. And another article, this is from Al Andalus, the Andalusian. We're talking about Spain. This is a Moorish Spain. This is during the occupation of the Iberian Peninsula, Andalusia, by the Moors or the Muslim. And it talks about their literary tradition, the textual tradition, and their word magic, esoteric. And I didn't realize it, but there is I could have assumed it, but I didn't know this. It says the article is concerned with the introduction of Rasil I Khan al-Saffad to Andalus. I'm not reading it correctly. It says it's important for the history of Arabic science. And you know that a lot of what we call, Western sciences has its origins in the Arab world, the Muslim world, and mathematics. And a lot of mathematics comes from the world of what we call India today, right? The original Aryan people. A lot of, especially physics, comes from India, and algebra is algebra. So it doesn't get any more specific than that. But this particular translation here in this word magic, they're looking at it as one of the important of the literature of Al-Andalus in the field of occult sciences. All right. So it's beginning to happen. It's coming from the super specialized academic research, and I want to kind of push it into the center so that we can get rid of race, class, and gender, because it is true to its word, its origins, has engendered nothing but hate and slavery and impoverishment in U.S. and Britain, most throughout much of the English-speaking world. Let me just conclude with the 4 or 5 minutes I have left with this book that I introduced at the outset. It has great illustrations. I'll just leaf through here and I'll describe to you some of the figures here that you might recognize. Let's see here. Peter Matheson. Some people say Matthias. I think it's Matheson. Peter Matheson is one of these guys who helped inspire what we now know as green writing, eco writing. He was one of the founding fathers of environmental literature, but he was a spook. He helped found and manage the Partisan Review in France. You know, all the lore about all these great writers like Hemingway and Fitzgerald, 1930s, and James Joyce, and later Sam. You know, and yeah, that's true. But did you know that the CIA and MI6, they were all there trying to control these intellectuals, these expats, and to make sure. And so they put to make sure to control it. So they put people like Peter Matheson there, and he won a National Book Award in 2008 for his some novel. It's probably pretty bad. It's Shadow Country. It's probably to reward him for his lifelong professional and personal service to the New World Order in the guise of literary achievement. Says in interviews promoting the novel, he confirmed much of what had already been known about his CIA service, but did not reveal any new details. So Matheson himself acknowledges this. George Plimpton, his real name is Plimpton. George Plimpton. You remember him? Because these guys all have a nice and friendly public persona. You remember him from Paper Tiger, where he would suit up as a Detroit Lion and do do these football drills, right? That's how I didn't know, Bennett Cerf. I thought he was a guy on What's My Line. I didn't know he was the editor of Random House. But anyway, he was a player along with Peter Matheson. George Plimpton was the editor, and I think the founder of one of the co-founders of the Paris Review, right? And let me read again. Like her father, Jimmy Humes encouraged Plimpton to own up to the Paris Review's ties to the CIA, but Plimpton demurred. She said, what obsessed Plimpton late in life, according to Robert Stivers, was the hope that hidden in the little corner of the basement of Ernest Hemingway's museum outside Havana was an undiscovered, unpublished Hemingway novel. So he wanted to pretend that he was a man of letters all the way to the end. Plimpton. Here's a picture of Norman Mailer, right? His connection there is a little bit more complex. I won't go into it. James Baldwin, there weren't a lot of famous black writers in the late 50s and into the 60s, but as the civil rights movement of the 60s picked up, the agency and the government of the U.S., they needed a base to put out there and say, hey, listen, why can't we all get along, right? So that was James Baldwin. The fact that he was gay also helped to encourage the nascent gay liberation movement. So he was a decent writer. I don't think he was, incredibly gifted. He had a lot of the pulpit, Southern revival type of cadences. He was an interesting writer, and he became a public figure. He was on the talk shows with Margaret Mead, an anthropologist who was also agency controlled, by the way, and on and on. So this guy, this author, Joel Whitney, provides a convincing argument that this whole concept of psycho-trigger word magic is true. Now, he doesn't get into Mark David Chapman and doesn't get into J.G. Salinger and the assassination of John Lennon. That's my job, and that's your job. And we can do this by looking, as we have already to a certain extent, at music, right? The implantation of certain codes, source codes, certain frequencies. This is a 2-volume study that I found used on backward masking in music production. And I am trying to, and I'm not there yet, ladies and gentlemen. You please help me. I think there's something similar to backward, and I think backward masking was real. It was supposedly discredited. Oh yeah, that's just a bunch of garbage that some people dreamed up to sue Twisted Sister for these kids who murdered their playmates. There's all these sensational distractions, really, lawsuits put out there against these rock. The devil made me do it through backward masking, and it's ordered to make it, something that we can dismiss as being silly, but it's real. And I'm saying there's something that's going on in the literature. We know it's going on in the Netflix. It's going on in the movies. But how does this stuff jump off page? How does it come off of the two, between the lines here? I can understand about frequencies and flicker rates and in the movies on Netflix. But I think Harry Potter and, the Hunger Games and literature is not dead. The written word is not dead. I want to understand the backward masking analog in literature to understand further how these psycho triggers are operating in our society and further controlling our thought and our behavior, our personal behavior and our social and our political behavior. We know how, it's pretty obvious how the Proud Boys or so-called Antifa, how they manipulate people and guide them into certain directions, or the Q phenomenon, right? We know that that's pretty obvious, but on a more subtle level, we're being hit with the psycho trigger word magic. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm out of time. Thank you for following over to the new stream. I see Corky's there, the Mobsterful's there. And Corky, thank you for joining us like usual at the Patreon. Your comments were and your observations were very much welcomed. And I will name check others as I go on here. But I have to check out. I'm going to get myself a cup of tea, and I'll join you in an hour at the Thursday Trio, and we'll see what arises in that conversation. As you know, our intrepid hero and investigative reporter George Webb is down in Tampa, and I'm very interested to see what he has come up with during his stay there. And I guess they're going to start the charrette. I think it starts today, or maybe certainly by Friday and through the weekend. That's going to be really interesting, and I'll be joining John O'Loughlin. That's his channel. Macduff Lives at 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me again. I apologize for the stream ending, but we got it right back where it is. And know that I'll be publishing this material in book form. So whatever YouTube wants to do, have at it. This material is going to be out there very soon. Thank you again. Bye.